What if the man who spent his entire life building his daughter's dream was suddenly told he didn't belong in it? At 65, after years of sacrifice and hard work, one father plans the perfect wedding for his daughter, only to hear words that shatter his heart. But what he does next, no one saw coming. I am 65 years old, and when I look back at my life in New York, it feels like every single day was spent running to one goal without ever stopping to breathe. The city never slows down, and neither did I. For decades, I worked on Wall Street, surrounded by noise, pressure, and people who only cared about numbers. Early mornings turned into late nights, and weekends felt no different from weekdays. While others chased luxury and status, I was chasing something far more personal, my daughter's happiness. After my wife passed away, my daughter became my entire world. Everything I did, every decision I made, revolved around her. I still remember the nights when she was little, waiting for me to come home. No matter how exhausted I was, I would sit beside her, listen to her stories, help her with her homework, and promise her that one day I would give her everything she ever dreamed of. Those small moments kept me going, even on the hardest days. Life on Wall Street was not easy. There were times when the pressure felt unbearable, when I thought about quitting, when my health started to suffer. But I never allowed myself to stop. I kept telling myself that this sacrifice had a purpose. Every extra hour I worked meant more security for her future. Every bonus I earned was carefully saved, not spent. While others upgraded their lives, I stayed simple. I avoided unnecessary luxuries, skipped vacations, and lived far below what I could afford, all because I had a bigger plan in mind. Over the years, those savings slowly grew into something meaningful. I watched my daughter grow into a strong, independent woman, and every milestone in her life felt like a reward for my struggles. Her education, her achievements, her smile, they made everything worth it. And deep inside, I always carried one dream that I never spoke about out loud. I wanted her wedding day to be perfect. Not just good, not just decent, but unforgettable. I imagined a day where she would walk into a beautiful venue, surrounded by elegance and joy, feeling like the most special person in the world. I wanted her to feel proud, not just of herself, but of where she came from. I wanted her to know that her father had done everything in his power to make her happy. That dream became my motivation as I approached retirement. Instead of thinking about slowing down, I became even more focused. Every penny I saved had a purpose now. People often told me to relax, to enjoy life, to spend on myself for once. But they didn't understand that my happiness was never tied to material things. My happiness was seeing my daughter smile, without worry, without stress, knowing that everything was taken care of. I wasn't building a fortune for myself. I was building a moment for her. A single day that would represent a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and dedication. When the time finally came to start planning her wedding, I approached it with the same discipline and focus that had defined my entire career. This was not something I was going to leave to chance or half-hearted decisions. I wanted everything to be perfect, down to the smallest detail. Chicago felt like the right place, elegant, vibrant, and full of life. And when I found a luxury hotel near Michigan Avenue, I knew instantly that this was where her special day would unfold. I remember walking through the venue for the first time, taking in the grand hall, the sparkling chandeliers, and the polished floors, that reflected the light so beautifully. I could already imagine her walking down the aisle, dressed in white, with everyone watching in admiration. That image stayed in my mind as I began making arrangements. I met with planners, designers, and coordinators, carefully listening to every suggestion, but always keeping one thing in mind. This had to feel like her dream, not just an event. I chose decorations that were elegant, but not overwhelming, flowers that added warmth without losing their grace, and lighting that would make the entire evening feel magical. I spent hours going over menus, tasting dishes, and ensuring that every guest would feel welcomed and satisfied. Nothing was rushed. Every decision carried weight because I knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime moment. I wasn't just organizing a wedding. I was crafting a memory. I would stay with her forever. The guest list was handled with care, making sure that the people who mattered most would be there to celebrate with her. I coordinated with vendors, reviewed contracts, and double-checked timelines. My experience from years in a demanding profession helped me stay organized, but this felt far more meaningful than any deal I had ever worked on. There was emotion behind every choice, a sense of pride in being able to provide something so special. One of the most important details for me was her dress. I made sure she had access to the finest designers, encouraging her to choose something that truly reflected who she was. When she finally selected her gown, I could see the excitement in her eyes, and for a moment, it felt like everything I had worked for was coming together, exactly as I had imagined. That happiness on her face made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. As the plans continued to fall into place, I often found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me here. From long nights on Wall Street to quiet evenings at home, everything had led to this point. I wasn't thinking about the money I was spending or the effort it required. All I cared about was giving her a day where she would feel cherished, valued, and loved beyond measure. There was a deep sense of satisfaction in watching it all come together, piece by piece. Each confirmation email, each finalized detail, felt like another step closer to fulfilling a promise I had made to myself years ago. This wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was the embodiment of everything I had lived for, a reflection of a father's dedication, and a lifetime of quiet sacrifices that were finally taking shape into something beautiful. 2 weeks before the wedding, everything was already in place, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel a sense of relief. The pressure that had followed me for decades seemed to ease, even if only slightly. I thought the hardest part was over. All that remained was to welcome the day I'd been preparing for my entire life. That was when Amelia told me she wanted to meet. She came to see me in Manhattan, a place where I had spent countless hours working, yet that day felt completely different. As I waited for her, I found myself smiling without even realizing it. I thought she might be excited, maybe nervous, like any bride would be so close to her wedding. I imagined we would talk about final details, share a few laughs, maybe even reminisce about the past. But the moment she walked in, something felt off. There was a distance in her presence that I couldn't quite explain. Her smile felt forced, her eyes avoided mine, and her tone lacked the warmth I had always known. I tried to ignore it at first, convincing myself that it was just stress from the wedding. After all, it was a big moment in her life. But as we sat down and started talking, That uneasy feeling only grew stronger. She didn't waste much time. Her words came out direct, almost rehearsed, as if she had been preparing herself to say them. She told me that Marcus, her fiancé, and his family had certain expectations. They were particular about appearances, about the kind of people they associated with, about how everything looked from the outside, and somehow I didn't fit into that picture. At first, I didn't fully understand what she meant. I asked her to explain, hoping I had misunderstood, but then she said it more clearly. She told me that my simple way of living, my age, even the way I spoke, made them uncomfortable. She said, they felt I didn't match the image they wanted to present during the wedding. And then, without hesitation, she said it would be better if I didn't attend. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her correctly. The words echoed in my mind, but they didn't feel real. I looked at her, searching for some sign of emotion, some trace of hesitation, but there was none. She continued, explaining that my presence might embarrass them, that it could create an awkward situation in front of Marcus's family and their guests. She spoke calmly, as if she were discussing something ordinary, something practical. But for me, it was anything but ordinary. It felt like everything I had built over the years was collapsing in front of me. All the sacrifices, all the silent struggles, all the dreams I had carried for her, reduced to a single moment where I was no longer welcome. Not because I had failed her, but because I didn't meet someone else's standard. I wanted to say something. I wanted to remind her of the past, of everything we had been through together. I wanted to ask her how she could say something like that without even pausing. But the words never came out. They stayed trapped inside me, buried under the weight of disbelief and pain. So I sat there quietly. I listened as she finished speaking, as if she had just delivered a simple request. And in that silence, something inside me changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that I could feel deep within myself. I realized that the moment I had been waiting for my entire life was no longer mine to be a part of. That night, I barely slept. The silence in my apartment felt heavier than usual, as if every wall was echoing her words back at me. I sat alone for hours, replaying the conversation again and again, trying to make sense of it. There was a part of me that still hoped it had been a misunderstanding, that maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But deep down I knew exactly what she had said, and what it meant. By morning, something inside me had settled. The pain was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer just heartbreak. It was clarity. I had spent my entire life putting her happiness above everything else. But for the first time, I realized that I had completely ignored my own dignity in the process. I had been willing to give her everything, except the one thing I should have protected the most, my self-respect. I got up early, earlier than I had in years, without the pressure of work calling me. The city outside was just beginning to wake up, but my decision was already made. There was no anger in me, no desire for revenge, just a quiet understanding that something had to change. I walked over to my desk, picked up my phone, and dialed the number of the wedding planner in Chicago. When they answered, I spoke calmly, almost as if I were handling a routine matter. I told them to cancel everything. At first there was confusion on the other end. They reminded me of the scale of the event, the contracts, the timing, the money involved. But I didn't hesitate. I confirmed each cancellation one by one. The venue on Michigan Avenue, the catering arrangements, the decorations, the music, the accommodations, every detail that had once filled me with pride was now being erased in a matter of minutes. After that, I contacted the hotel directly and ensured the booking was completely terminated. I reached out to the designer handling her dress and stopped the remaining payments. Every transaction tied to that wedding was cut off. It was a strange feeling, watching something I had built so carefully disappear so quickly. But instead of feeling regret, I felt a sense of control returning to me. This wasn't about punishing her. It was about no longer allowing myself to be part of something where I wasn't respected. Each call I made felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself that I had given away over the years. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't acting out of emotion. Everything was measured, deliberate, and final. By the time I was done, there was nothing left of the wedding I had spent months planning. The day passed quietly after that. I didn't reach out to her, and she didn't call. Not yet. I knew the moment would come when she would realize what had happened. I could almost imagine the confusion turning into frustration, the frustration turning into anger. But I wasn't afraid of that moment anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt still. Not empty, not broken, just still. I sat by the window as the evening approached, watching the city move on as it always does, indifferent to personal stories like mine. And in that stillness, I understood something clearly. Love does not mean accepting disrespect. Sacrifice does not mean erasing yourself. And no matter how deep a bond may seem, it cannot survive without a foundation of respect. By the evening, the call finally came. I had been expecting it, yet when my phone started ringing and I saw her name on the screen, I paused for a moment before answering. There was no rush, no anxiety, just a quiet awareness that this was the moment where everything would surface. As soon as I picked up, her voice came through, loud and shaken, filled with anger and panic. She didn't greet me, didn't ask how I was. She went straight into accusations, demanding to know what I had done. She told me the venue manager wasn't allowing her inside. She said her cards were being declined, that payments weren't going through, that everything was falling apart. I could hear the chaos in her voice, the confusion, the frustration, the disbelief. It sounded like the world she had carefully built around herself was suddenly slipping out of her control. For a brief second, I felt the old instinct to fix everything, to calm her down, to step in and make it all like I always had. But this time, I didn't. I let her speak until she had nothing left to say. And when the silence finally came, I responded in a calm, steady tone that even surprised me. There was no anger in my voice, no bitterness, just a quiet truth that I had finally accepted within myself. I told her that if her father's presence was something she considered embarrassing, then his money didn't belong there either. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything I'd been holding inside. There was a pause on the other end, a kind of silence that felt different from before. It wasn't filled with anger anymore, but with something else, something heavier. I continued, not to hurt her, but to make her understand. I told her that she was free to have her wedding exactly the way she wanted, with the people she believed were worthy of being around her, the same people whose approval mattered more than the man who had spent his life standing behind her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind her of the past or list the sacrifices I had made. I didn't need to. At that moment, it wasn't about proving anything. It was about setting a boundary that I should have set long ago, a boundary that said my presence, my identity, and my dignity were not things to be hidden or dismissed. After I finished speaking, I didn't wait for her response. I simply ended the call. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different. There was no heaviness pressing down on me, no lingering tension. Instead, there was a strange sense of lightness, as if something I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. I sat there for a while, letting that feeling settle, trying to understand it. It wasn't happiness, at least not in the usual sense. It was something deeper, a sense of release, of finally choosing myself after a lifetime of choosing someone else. I realized that I hadn't lost anything in that moment. What I had lost had already been slipping away long before that conversation. What I gained instead was something I had neglected for too long, my self-respect. I understood then that relationships are not sustained by sacrifice alone. They require mutual respect, acknowledgement, and a sense of value on both sides. Without that, even the strongest bonds begin to break down, no matter how much love once existed. As the night grew quieter, I sat back and allowed myself to breathe in a way I hadn't in years. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about what I needed to do next for someone else. I wasn't planning fixing or sacrificing. I was simply present, aware of who I was and what I deserved. And in that stillness, I finally felt free in a way I had never experienced before. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you never miss another powerful story like this.